Visiting Antarctica is a bucket list trip for so many people, especially those who want to hit all 7 continents. But a lot of people wonder, how do you even get to Antarctica? I visited Antarctica in December, and in this video, I'm going to share my tips, recommendations, and all the things I wish I knew before I started planning my trip there. What's up? For those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Sierra, and I've spent the last several years making the most of remote work by traveling internationally and around the Western US. And on this channel, I share my tips and recommendations and experiences along the way. So if you're planning a trip to Antarctica, the first question you need to answer is, how do I even get there? And there's many different modes of transportation for getting to the continent. So most people get to Antarctica by taking a commercial cruise or expedition trip, where they'll take a ship with like 100 other people, sail to the continent, and be able to walk and explore it themselves. You can also charter a plane or a yacht. There are options to do that. However, these are very expensive, so not an option for most people. However you plan to get to Antarctica, just be sure that your tour group or your company is part of IATO, which is essentially the organization down there of all the tour companies agreeing to ethically and responsibly take tourists to the continent, because we want to preserve it and we want to make sure the wildlife is safe and we're not doing anything to harm them. So however you plan to get there, just be sure you're going with a reputable company. My friend and I went with Cork Expeditions, and one thing I really appreciated about them, because they are a part of IATO, is they had a whole detailed presentation on expectations, how to kind of navigate the continent, how close or how far you have to be from wildlife, and best practices to make sure we aren't disturbing them from their like natural activities in their days and part of their days. So being able to understand how to act and have guidance around that was super helpful and super valuable. Since most people tend to take commercial trips down there, I'm going to be focusing on cruises in this video, because that is the most common way that people do go to Antarctica, especially from South America, particularly Ushuaia, Argentina. So after you've decided whether you're going to charter a boat, take a dedicated cruise, maybe even charter a plane, you'll most likely be leaving from South America. The most common port is out of Ushuaia, Argentina, which is on the very tip of the continent, and is known as like one of the southernmost places in the world, if not the southernmost, other than Antarctica, of course. So many cruises and trips leave out of here, but I know I've also heard of people taking trips from like Australia, like flyover trips, or even some out of South Africa. So there are different places you can leave from, but the most common is Ushuaia, Argentina, and it does take a while to get down there, because even if you fly into Buenos Aires, it is a multiple-hour flight to the very tip of the country. So my friend and I took a cruise, and we left out of Ushuaia, just like a lot of other folks. The next thing you want to ask yourself is like, what kind of cruise or what kind of experience do I want from this adventure, from this trip? And that really is critical, because some people just want to enjoy the scenic views and sail by and just see how beautiful it is and watch it from the decks. Other people want to actually go onto the continent and walk around and do a bit of hiking and things like that. One requires more activity and like movement than the other, so depending on your ability level and what you enjoy doing in your free time, that could change. But knowing whether you actually want to step foot on the continent or not is critical for choosing the right cruise. So if you want to visit one of the southernmost parts of the world, at least most southern part of the world, and enjoy the scenic views, but maybe not step onto the continent, you can take a cruise with one of the larger companies, one of the more recognizable companies out there. They offer cruises. They'll take you even to other parts of Argentina and in Chile sometimes, and they'll cruise by Antarctica so you can see it. You get to see the mountains, the icebergs, the glaciers, all of that, but you don't get too close and you don't actually get to step on the continent. The benefit is it's a lot cheaper than going on a cruise that actually takes you like onto the continent, but that is kind of the limitation. On the other side of things, if you know you want to get on the continent, you can do a walk on and see the animals up close and personal. Go on some of the Zodiac boats that get you super close to icebergs and get you super close to whales and things like that, and even do some of the hikes or camping on the continent. You'll have to go with a smaller, more niche tour company. So my friend and I went with Cork Expeditions, which we really enjoyed, and it's a much smaller boat. It's like, I think 120 passengers in total. So it's not overwhelming. There's never too many people around, and it doesn't like put too much pressure on the natural areas you're walking around and exploring. The drawback there is, yes, you get to go to Antarctica and step on it and explore it, but it's also very expensive. So as you're thinking about what kind of trip you want, you also have to kind of think about budget. Like, if the goal is to just see it and enjoy it and be in all the natural beauty, but budget is a consideration, choosing one of those larger cruise ships and cruise lines might be the way to go. But if you're dead set on, I want to touch that continent, I want to be there, then you will have to go with a smaller tour company. For me and my friend, because we want to do a walk-on, we did an 11-day itinerary, which took a couple days to sail there. We spent about 5 days on the Antarctic Peninsula, going onto the continent and exploring some of the islands nearby before sailing back to Ushuaia. As I mentioned, it's very expensive to go to Antarctica, even compared to like chartered boats and chartered yachts and chartered flights. Like, the cruises themselves are still very expensive, which is unfortunate, but it's also the reality. So if you're going on one of those larger cruise ships that I mentioned, one of those larger operators where you're going along Antarctica and you get to see all the pretty views, but you're not stepping onto the continent, those are a bit more affordable. When my friend and I were looking for cruises, we saw some for like $2,000 to $4,000 a person, which is still very expensive, but is on the lower end compared to some of the other options that I was talking about. But if you actually want to walk on the continent and enjoy the little zodiac rides, the prices will increase pretty dramatically. When my friend and I were looking, I think some of the cheapest we saw were like $8,000 a person, but there were some that went to over $25,000 a person for a trip. And because those ships are so luxurious, like some of them have helicopters to do flyover tours, all this crazy stuff. So to actually walk onto the continent is very expensive. But I will say, like, they have beautiful accommodations. The food is very good. The staff is phenomenal, but it is very expensive. So for me, this is a trip I had to save up for because it was something that seemed amazing to me, but I knew would cost a ton of money. Now, if you want to do a walk-on, but $8,000 to $10,000 at a minimum is still way out of budget, I hear you. There are a couple things you can do to try to bring down that cost. You can plan in advance, book early. Sometimes there's discounts on that, or you can kind of keep an eye out and look for savings or deals around different times of the year. Something that only anecdotally, it's not like marketed anywhere or anything like that, but I spoke with some people while I was down there who just showed up in Ushuaia. They had a lot of flexibility about when they could leave, and they contacted tour operators and just said, hey, if you have any unsold spots, I would love to go. Let me know. And pretty much you have to be ready to go within 24-hour notice. So it's, if any of their spots go unfilled or someone isn't able to make it last minute and you already are in Ushuaia and can leave pretty much immediately, sometimes they knock off thousands of dollars for that price. Like, the people I spoke to signed NDAs, so they couldn't say how much they paid, but they said it was a fraction of the cost of what the rest of us paid. So one option is, if you want to save money and you have some flexibility with your travel, is heading to Ushuaia, hanging out there for a few days and being ready to go immediately and looking for any unsold spots on cruises that are already scheduled to depart around that time. As I mentioned, it's expensive, but it's also very luxurious. The boat we went on had libraries, just like floor to ceiling windows and an entire observation deck. So these are very nice ships. They're small, but they're very nice, and they're special designed to like break through icebergs and things like that. So they're reinforced, however ships are reinforced, so they're super safe, but also are meant for luxury and enjoying the views. So beyond just like the amenities of, like, ours had a sauna, 2 hot tubs, a heated pool, a gym, I think I mentioned a library, 2 restaurants, things like that. Like, there's plenty of spaces and amenities on the ship, but they also have really great experts on board, from photography to geology to history. They can speak to so many different aspects of Antarctica and some of the countries that have claims to it. So you're there and you're enjoying the scenery and you're seeing the animals, but you're also learning a ton from the experts on board. And these are also the experts who take you on the Zodiac tours and take you ashore, so they can point out, oh, that's a Gentoo penguin. And you see what it's doing is it's giving a rock to build its nest, and they can go into more depth. So it's really like being inside a National Geographic documentary, because you're seeing it happen in real time and you're getting that like expert professional voiceover as it's happening, which is really cool. Also, it is cold down there. Like in terms of weather, we went in December, which was like spring into summer. The high was maybe 30 degrees Fahrenheit on the warmest day. So it's, even in summer, it's not super warm, but that makes the hot tubs and heated pools so much nicer. Like one of my favorite memories from that trip was my friend and I just sitting in the hot tub. It's snowing. It's like maybe 20 degrees outside. And the boat's sailing away as we prepare to go to our next destination. And we just saw humpback whales just blowing up air, diving under, seeing their tails just kind of following behind the ship, which was so cool because there was no one out there because it was so cold and it's snowing, but you're inside a warm hot tub and you see a humpback whale just doing its thing, like not far from the boat at all. So it's a very cool experience. Some of you may be familiar with the Drake Passage, and for those of you who aren't, it is a passage or a part of water that you have to cross to get to Antarctica, and it is known for some of the roughest waters in the world because it's where the hot and cold currents meet, which creates a lot of waves and just uneasiness on the sea. So if you go to Antarctica, you have to be prepared for that. I brought Dramamine. I don't usually get motion sickness, but I was not feeling well in the Drake Passage. There's also a doctor on board who can give you motion sickness pills. They offer like ginger chews, lots of water, saltines, anything that'll like help your stomach feel okay. If you're really not feeling well, the restaurant staff can bring food up to you, things like that, because they understand that amount of motion is not normal for most people, and a lot of people do end up getting sick. But if you're going on the Drake Passage, they talked about it can either be Drake Lake or Drake Shake. Drake Lake is when it's super flat and it's enjoyable and it's pretty. You can hang out, enjoy like the decks, all that good stuff. Drake Shake is when the waves are high, it's bumpy, it's bouncy, and that's when most of the motion sickness happens. On the way there, we had Drake Lake. It not entirely, but it was relatively chill. Like I think I took some Dramamine, but I was okay, slightly queasy, but not bad. On the way back, I got pretty sick. My friend walked in, I was in the bathroom, like curled up in a ball. So it can be pretty rough. And the day I was like curled up in a ball feeling like absolute crap, the staff on board were like, yeah, this is like a 6 out of 10. It's not good, but it's also like not the worst we've ever seen, which is crazy to me because it was not feeling well. Like I think they said the waves were like 4 or 5 meters high, which is like 12 to 15 feet. Doesn't sound huge, but when you're on a little boat and you're just going back and forth and round for over 24 hours, it does get to you, or gets to most people eventually. My friend, on the other hand, completely fine. I was in bed feeling like crap, and he went to the gym and worked out. So some people are just built different. I'm not, but some people are. So once you make it past the Drake Passage and actually get to Antarctica, you'll follow a pretty rigorous and consistent schedule. Once we were like on the Antarctic Peninsula, it was actually like exhausting, which we didn't expect because we thought, oh, it's a vacation, we're gonna see cool stuff and chill. But the way I described it is there's so many cool things happening, from the animals to the scenery to everything. My mind felt like I was buffering the whole time. So I was somehow exhausted by the end of the day. So your typical day will go with like a wake call around 6:30 or 7. Breakfast will usually be from 8 to 9. 9 to 12 is usually the first expedition of the day, which can either be a Zodiac tour, so those are boats of like 8 to 10 people, and you just kind of cruise around the area around the ship. That's going into little bays, little inlets, things like that, going between icebergs and exploring and getting to see kind of the scenery from down on the water, and that's where a lot of the whale watching happens. Sometimes you pull into little bays and see like penguins on the side, penguins swimming underwater, which is really cool. Then you come back on board for lunch, and that's usually, I'd say, from like 12 to 1. You get about an hour, hour and a half, and then you get another hour or 2 break. So usually around 2 or 3, you'll go on your second excursion. Yeah, I'd say from like 2 to 4 or 5, you could do your second excursion. So that could be a Zodiac ride again, or it could be an on-continent landing. So when that happens, it's usually an hour and a half block on each side. So you have an hour and a half on a Zodiac tour cruising around. While half of the boat is doing that, the other half will go on the Zodiac boat to get dropped off either on an Antarctic island or on the continent itself. And the staff set up paths for you to walk on, so you're not really destroying anything. You have to stay on the established paths. You can't get too close to the animals, but you do get to get close enough to see them and hear them, and unfortunately smell them sometimes. So it's plenty close enough. And then after an hour and a half, you'll both switch. So it's a mix of being on the continent and on the islands and exploring and hiking and just watching the animals in their natural habitats. And then on the other side of that are Zodiac cruises, where you're cruising around and whale watching, or getting close to some icebergs and things like that. There's nothing quite like the silence that comes as you're all listening for a whale to breach. And then you hear it like 20 feet away, and you see the water come up, and you hear the noises it's making, and it's so close, and you get to see the bumps on the whale, things like that. Or you're just on the continent and you're just walking a path, and a penguin crosses right in front of you. A lot of questions is, can you touch the penguins? Can you hug them? The answer is no. Let the penguins be. Don't leave them alone. Don't touch them. But sometimes they'll kind of follow you as you're walking down the trail, or they'll walk right in front of you. They're not afraid of humans, so they aren't avoiding us when we're on the trail. So it's just a magical experience to be that close to that many cool animals. Like for me, I'd never seen whales before. Amazing. I'd never seen penguins in the wild, obviously, so that was really cool. And then after you finish your last excursion of the day, you'll come back on board. They'll usually have tea time, or as you come on, because you're cold from being out in the air and out in the open areas. They'll serve hot cocoa or tea or coffee with some snacks. You'll go back to your rooms. You'll change out of your excursion gear and maybe get into something more comfortable before dinner. And then they'll have dinner, and then usually some kind of activity afterwards or some free time. So it is kind of a jam-packed day. I was exhausted after every single day. And it's not like we were doing a ton. It wasn't like the hikes we were doing in Patagonia before that, where we were hiking 10 miles. It was just, this is so cool. All of this is just so overwhelming for the senses. And then you go to bed relatively early. Most people went to bed by 9 or 10 and started early for the day. So it is a very tight schedule, but you get to fit in so much into the few days you're actually there. So my friend and I booked our cruise too late, but some of the other folks we met got to do some of the extra excursions. So there's camping on Antarctica, where they'll take you to the continent and give you a sleeping bag, and you get to just spend the night in Antarctica. But one thing you have to consider when you think about that, I thought that sounded so cool in theory, except it's almost always daylight there. Depending on what time of year, it might always be daylight. So the sun doesn't really go down. So that's something you need to be aware of. If you're going to go camping, bring an eye mask if you're actually trying to sleep, because a lot of the people who came back the next day were I couldn't sleep. Also, it was sleet and snow when they were doing it. So it was kind of a rough time, but on a clear weather day, I'm sure that would be an amazing experience to just enjoy the quiet of the continent. There's nothing out there. There's no buildings. There's no even lifeguards or anything even around. There's one staff member to make sure everybody's safe and healthy, but it's really just one of the most unique and isolated experiences you can have out there, I think. Some of the other excursion options you can pay extra for are kayaking or sea paddling. Still not entirely clear on what the difference one was. I think one is a sitting kayak, and one is one of those floating kayaks. Regardless, if you can get a spot doing that, highly recommend it. At first, my friend and I were that's really expensive for just kayaking, but you get to do it multiple times on the trip, and oftentimes these folks were so close to the whales. They got to go super close to icebergs and things like that. So that's one thing I wish I had done. So if it's an option on yours and you can afford it, I recommend taking advantage of it, because it looked pretty incredible. The other activity that was all the rage and we're there was the polar plunge. So on one of the last days when you're in Antarctica, you come out in your bathing suit, you get in line, and you jump into the Antarctic waters, and it is really freaking cold. The hardest part is honestly standing in just your bathing suit waiting, because with the wind chill, you're just shivering, no towel, nothing. And then once you're actually jumping in, the shock takes a couple seconds to hit, so you don't actually realize you're cold until you're getting back out, and at that point, you got a towel, you're starting to warm up again, and it's fine. But if you're gonna go, highly recommend doing this if you can, if it's healthy for you to do it. But it was very fun and a very cool experience, and very a huge adrenaline rush when you do it. Now my goal is to go to the Arctic and do an Arctic polar plunge and be able to do it in both hemispheres. But yeah, it was really cold. Another thing you have to think about as you're planning a trip is what time of year do you want to go? So Antarctic cruises only run in the summer. So in the southern hemisphere, it's flipped, and summer is actually like November to March, which is when the cruises run. Depending on what you want to do and what you want to see, you'll want to choose the right month. So the peak is, I think, like December and January. Things get more expensive. Things tend to book out a little sooner, partially because of the holidays. It's a little easier to take time off for folks. But also that's a good time because it's starting to warm up. You start seeing hatchlings. Like when we were there, there's lots of penguin eggs everywhere and you can see them incubating them. And then we saw a few hatchlings of other different kinds of birds in the area, which was really cute. So if you go like January, you'll start seeing those babies. February, you'll really see the babies, which, like, if that's what you want to experience, is really cool. The benefit of going earlier is there's more like ice, and then things are just starting to warm up again, so you see more activity and things like that as Antarctica starts to come to life again. So depending on pricing and what you want to experience while there, I'd recommend looking into the desired months, because if you want to see the baby penguins, which is really cute, you'll want to go later in the summer versus earlier. But I did meet someone who went twice, and they said any time of year is still a great time of year to go. You're going to see unbelievable stuff no matter what. And that brings me to the final and most important question. Was it worth it? This trip was the most I've ever spent on a trip in my entire life, and I've traveled a lot. And putting the down payment on it and everything else, it hurt. Like, I saved up and it still hurt to spend that much money. But after our first day there, I knew immediately that it was worth it. It is such an amazing experience. A lot of people ask me, like, why would you spend that much money to just say you went somewhere? And if that's why you're going and you can spend that kind of money to just say you went somewhere, cool, good for you. For me, it was, I love the mountains. I love being outside, and I love seeing wildlife in their natural habitat. And there's not many places in the world where you can go where you can do that and it's completely undeveloped. Everywhere you look, undeveloped and untouched, pristine beauty. And I think that was the thing I could not have prepared myself for most, because I'd been to Banff, I'd been to Iceland, I saw cool glaciers, I'd seen beautiful mountains in the past, but they were always packed with people and roads and cars and all this other stuff. But when you're in Antarctica, none of that is there. It is just the quiet and the views, and it is amazing to experience. And the animals are so cute and so silly because they aren't afraid of you. They don't exactly like come up to you, but like you get to just see them in their natural habitats being silly, hopping around. Like anything a penguin does is really cute anyways, but like dropping rocks, chasing each other, like you can just sit there for 25 minutes and watch them 20 feet away from you, just living their lives and being adorable. Or they'll porpoise behind your boats as you're zodiac cruising. They'll just kind of jump up behind you or even alongside the boat. So it is an incredible experience. If you love wildlife, if you love just natural beauty and just all of those kinds of things, it is a once in a lifetime experience. I highly recommend. I would go back if I could afford it. It's one day a dream. I would love to go with maybe some of my friends, some of my family members, but yes, it is 100% worth it. And if you're able to plan a trip in 2025 or early 2026, highly recommend it because you will enjoy every second of it. Well, that's it, guys. Those are all my tips and recommendations for if you're planning your trip to Antarctica this year or in the next couple of years. I'm so excited for you. I wish I could go again. I'm a little jealous, but you will have a wonderful time. If you have any other questions, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to share any of the details or answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe and follow the channel. Bye-bye.